They thought I was just the invisible stepdaughter, someone they could humiliate at the dinner table without consequence. But they had no idea that the person they looked down on was secretly sitting on $68 million. And that night, when my stepfather's angry shouts echoed through the kitchen, when his contempt finally crossed the line, I knew the moment had come. The moment to show them exactly who they'd been stepping on all these years. The moment to walk away and never look back. My name is Emily Monroe, and I'm 34 years old. That night in our suburban Columbus home started like any other family dinner. My mother Linda bustling around the kitchen, placing steaming dishes on the worn oak table while my stepfather Richard sat at the head like a king surveying his kingdom. My half-brother Kyle was scrolling through his phone, occasionally showing something to Sophie, Richard's daughter from his first marriage, who giggled at whatever was on the screen. The aroma of pot roast filled the dining room, mixing with the tension that always seemed to hover just beneath the surface of our family gatherings. I took my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen, convenient for when Mom needed help, but far enough from Richard to avoid most of his attention. Or so I thought. "So, Emily," Richard began, sawing into his meat with unnecessary force. "Kyle tells me you turned down helping him with the garage startup. Again." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "Richard, we discussed this. $20,000 is what too much for the high and mighty financial analyst?" His voice rose, fork clattering against his plate. "You sit there in your fancy office at that Summit Point Capital place, probably making more than any of us, and you can't help your own stepbrother," I corrected quietly, immediately regretting it. Richard's face turned red, the vein on his temple pulsing. "Oh, excuse me, stepbrother. Because you always have to make that distinction, don't you? Always reminding us you're somehow better, somehow separate from this family." Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair but said nothing, her eyes fixed on her plate. It was her signature move, disappearing in plain sight whenever Richard's temper flared. "That's not what I meant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've already helped with the house repairs, Sophie's tuition, Kyle's car. Nobody asked you to be a martyr." Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. Sophie smirked, clearly enjoying the show. "If you're going to help, then help. If not, then stop acting like we owe you something. Truth is, Emily, nobody in this family needs you. You just insert yourself, thinking your money makes you important." The words hung in the air like poison. Kyle didn't even look up from his phone. Sophie was openly grinning now. "And my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who raised me, who I'd supported for years, she just reached for the salt." "You know what your problem is," Richard continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're 34, no husband, no kids, just that pathetic apartment and your spreadsheets. You throw money around because it's the only way anyone would tolerate you. But guess what? We don't need your charity. This is my house. I take care of this family. You're just, what's the word, auxiliary? Unnecessary." Each word was a carefully placed dagger. Richard had perfected this over the years, the art of making me feel small, worthless, like an unwanted guest in what was supposed to be my family. He sat back in his chair, satisfied with his performance, while Sophie actually applauded softly. "Well said, Dad," she murmured. About time someone told her. I looked around the table at these people I'd called family, at my mother who wouldn't meet my eyes, at Kyle who was already texting someone about the drama at dinner, at Richard who wore his cruelty like a badge of honor, at Sophie who'd spent thousands of my dollars on her education while treating me like dirt. My hands were trembling, but not from hurt or fear. No, this was something else entirely. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for, the final push that would set me free. They had no idea who they were talking to, no idea that the pathetic woman they were tearing down had built an empire in silence, no idea that their entire lifestyle hung by a thread that I could cut with a single phone call. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table with deliberate calm. Richard laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "Oh, here we go. The dramatic exit. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Emily, and don't bother coming back until you've learned some respect for this family." I looked him straight in the eye, memorizing this moment. The last time Richard would ever speak to me this way. The last time any of them would treat me as less than, because they were about to learn that the person they'd dismissed, belittled, and used for years was about to become their worst nightmare, or rather, their reality check. "You're right, Richard," I said quietly. "You don't need me." Then I walked out, leaving my untouched plate and 13 years of silent endurance behind. Growing up, I learned early that poverty wasn't just about empty stomachs, it was about empty promises. My father left when I was 7, leaving Mom with nothing but debt and a girl who reminded her of better days gone wrong. We moved from our small house to a cramped apartment in the rough part of Columbus, where the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every sob, every desperate phone call Mom made trying to keep the lights on. By 14, I was working at a local diner after school, lying about my age to get the job. The owner knew but didn't care. Cheap labor was cheap labor. I'd come home at 11:30 at night, grease in my hair and homework still waiting, while Mom was already asleep or pretending to be. She'd remarried Richard by then, and suddenly I wasn't just supporting myself but contributing to the family, too. "Emily doesn't need new clothes," Richard would say. "She's working. She can buy her own." Meanwhile, Kyle got new sneakers every season, and Sophie, when she came to live with us, never wanted for anything. I wore the same 3 outfits through high school, washing them in the sink when the laundromat was too expensive. College was supposed to be my escape, but nobody in my family saw it that way. "Why waste time on college when you could work full-time?" Richard asked. "You're not smart enough for scholarships anyway." Those words burned, but they also fueled me. I applied everywhere, took out loans that would haunt me for years, and worked 3 jobs to make it happen. Overnight shifts at a warehouse, tutoring kids in math, cleaning offices on weekends, if it paid. I did it. While Kyle partied through community college on Mom's dime and Sophie got into a private university with Richard's enthusiastic support, I studied finance by candlelight when the electricity got cut off in my studio apartment. I taught myself coding from library computers, learned market analysis from free online courses, absorbed everything I could about wealth building from books I couldn't afford to buy, only borrow. My professors barely knew I existed. I was the ghost student who turned in perfect assignments but never attended office hours because I was working. Graduation came with no family in attendance. "We had Kyle's baseball game," Mom explained later. I walked across that stage with $40,000 in debt and a hunger that had nothing to do with the meals I'd skipped. The entry-level position at Summit Point Capital paid barely enough to cover my loans and a shabby apartment, but I saw opportunity where others saw grunt work. I stayed late analyzing patterns everyone else ignored, built models that caught the attention of senior partners, and slowly, methodically, started making moves nobody expected from the quiet girl in the corner cube. My first real break came when I identified an undervalued property in a gentrifying neighborhood. I borrowed against my 401k, a risk that would make any financial advisor cringe, and flipped it 6 months later for triple the investment. That money went into tech stocks just before they exploded, then cryptocurrency before it was mainstream, then real estate investment trusts that everyone said were too risky. Richard loved to joke at family dinners about my little job-pushing papers, while I was quietly building a portfolio that would make his jaw drop. Mom would nod along, adding how Kyle was the real entrepreneur in the family with his endless failed business ventures. They never asked about my work, never wondered why I stopped complaining about money, never noticed when I moved from that shabby apartment to a better one, then better still. By 30, I'd made my first million. By 32, it was 10. The market crash that destroyed so many portfolios, I'd seen it coming and shorted the right stocks. The recovery, I was positioned perfectly. Real estate, technology, renewable energy. I had my fingers in everything, but my family only saw the same quiet Emily who showed up to dinners and wrote checks when asked. $68 million. That's what my portfolio showed the morning of that fateful dinner. Diversified across 14 different investment vehicles, protected by trusts and LLCs they couldn't even pronounce. The girl who wasn't smart enough for scholarships had built an empire while they weren't looking. The one they called auxiliary could buy Richard's house 50 times over. But I never said a word. Let them think I was just a mid-level analyst. Let them believe their narrative that I was the family failure who happened to have a decent job. Because every check I wrote for their emergencies, every bailout I provided, I did knowing I could stop whenever I chose. The power was always mine. They just didn't know it. That night, driving away from their house, I thought about all those nights eating ramen in the dark, all those 16-hour shifts, all those moments they told me I'd never amount to anything. They created the hunger that built my fortune. Their cruelty was the fuel for my success. They just didn't know the bill had finally come due. The first call always came around the 15th of each month, like clockwork. "Emily, honey," Mom would start, her voice taking on that particular tone, part guilt, part expectation. "The mortgage is a little tight this month." Richard's commission check was smaller than expected. It was never a request, just a statement hanging in the air until I offered to help. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, always just enough to keep them comfortable while maintaining the fiction that Richard was the provider. Over the years, I'd become their invisible safety net. When the roof leaked during a storm, it was my 12,000 that fixed it, though Richard told everyone he'd handled it through his connections. When Kyle crashed his third car driving drunk, my 25,000 made the DUI disappear and bought him a new vehicle, a story that became Richard's tale of tough love and second chances. Sophie's private university tuition. Supposedly, Richard's sacrifice, but really my 40,000 a year disguised as family helping family. I kept meticulous records. Every transfer, every check, every cash handout carefully documented in a spreadsheet they'd mock me for maintaining. By my calculation, I'd funneled nearly $400,000 into their lives over 7 years. Not loans, gifts. Gifts that were never acknowledged, never appreciated, just expected and absorbed into the mythology of Richard's household. "It's what family does," Mom would say when I occasionally hesitated. "Remember when Richard let you stay in the basement that summer after college?" Yes, I remembered. 2 months in an unfinished basement with no air conditioning, paying them $600 a month in rent while I job hunted. But somehow that had transformed into a debt I could never fully repay. The requests escalated as my silence continued. Kyle's failed ventures became my responsibility. A food truck that never materialized 30,000, an app idea that went nowhere 15,000, a cryptocurrency scheme that was obviously a scam to everyone but him 40,000. Each failure was followed by Richard's lectures about how I should be investing in family instead of hoarding money like a miser. Sophie was smarter, more subtle. She'd cry about textbook costs, then post Instagram photos from Cancun. She'd mention struggling with rent, then show up with a new designer handbag, 20 here, 50 there, always with the unspoken threat that refusing would make me the jealous stepsister who wanted her to fail. I paid, and she collected, barely managing a thank you before asking for more. The most insulting part was how they'd rewrite history at every family gathering. Remember when Emily couldn't even afford groceries? Richard would laugh, pouring expensive whiskey I'd unknowingly funded. "Good thing this family takes care of its own." They'd nod and smile, retelling stories of my struggles while spending my money, never connecting the dots between my success and their comfort. Mom was the worst, in her quiet way. She knew exactly what she was doing when she'd mentioned the special assessment from the HOA, the medical bills from Richard's back surgery, the dream vacation they couldn't quite afford. She weaponized maternal guilt like a master, making me feel selfish for even hesitating. "I sacrificed so much for you growing up," she'd remind me, conveniently forgetting that I'd been working since 14 to buy my own necessities. The automatic transfers were their lifeblood. $3,000 monthly for household expenses, $1,500 for Kyle's business development, $2,000 for Sophie's educational costs. They didn't even know these were automatic. They just assumed I'd always be there. The eternal ATM disguised as a family member. Richard had even started planning renovations, casually mentioning that Emily would probably want to contribute to increasing the home value. What they never understood was that every dollar I gave them was a choice. I could have stopped at any time, but I was studying them, watching how money revealed character. Richard became more arrogant with each payment, more convinced of his own superiority. Kyle grew lazier, more entitled, treating failure as an opportunity for another handout. Sophie's contempt increased proportionally with my generosity, as if taking my money somehow made her better than me. And Mom. She just grew more comfortable in her silence, her complicity. She'd chosen Richard over me long ago, and my money was just the price she expected me to pay for the privilege of remaining in their lives. She'd perfected the art of looking away when Richard insulted me, of being conveniently absent when I needed support, but somehow always present when a check needed signing. They'd built their entire lifestyle on my earnings while maintaining the delusion that they were self-sufficient. Richard's new truck, Kyle's apartment, Sophie's graduation trip to Europe, Mom's kitchen renovation, all funded by the daughter they considered a burden. The family they claimed didn't need me was actually entirely dependent on me. That night, after Richard's tirade, I realized something profound. I hadn't been buying their love. Love can't be bought. I'd been funding my own abuse, paying them to treat me as less than human. Every dollar I'd given had been permission for them to dismiss me, to diminish me, to erase my contributions while taking everything I offered. The grift was perfect in its simplicity. They took my money while denying my worth, used my resources while mocking my existence, and I'd allowed it, thinking someday they'd see me, appreciate me, love me. But that night, I finally understood. To them, I wasn't family. I was just a resource to be exploited, and resources, I'd learned in all my years of finance, could be cut off. The $20,000 for Kyle's garage was supposed to be just another withdrawal from the bank of Emily. He'd pitched it to me 2 weeks before that dinner, showing up at my office unannounced with a business plan clearly downloaded from the internet, the template watermarks still visible. "It's a sure thing, Em," he'd said, using the childhood nickname only when he wanted something. "Classic car restoration is huge right now. I just need startup capital." I'd seen his previous sure things dissolve into nothing. The food truck that never got permits, the gym that never opened, the drop shipping business that shipped exactly nothing. Each failure followed by Richard's protective embrace and another request for family support. But this time, something in me had finally said no. Maybe it was the casual way Kyle mentioned he'd already put deposits down, assuming I'd cover it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was clarity. "I need to think about it," I'd told him. The shock on his face would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. He'd never heard those words from me before. That evening at dinner, Richard's attack wasn't really about the $20,000. It was about control. I'd broken the unspoken rule Emily always pays. When Richard stood up from his chair, his face purple with rage, spittle flying as he shouted, I saw him clearly for the first time, not as my stepfather, not as Mom's husband, but as a small man who needed to tower over others to feel tall. "You think you're so special with your fancy job," he roared, pointing his finger inches from my face. "You're nothing, nobody. Kyle is trying to build something real, something meaningful, and you can't even support your own family. What kind of person does that?" Sophie laughed, actually laughed, filming it on her phone. "This is gold," she muttered to Kyle. "Emily finally getting what she deserves." "She's always been selfish," Kyle added, his voice carrying that particular tone of the perpetually entitled, "Probably has hundreds of thousands saved up while we struggle. It's sick, honestly. If only they knew it was 68 million, not hundreds of thousands. The irony might have killed them. Mom's silence was the loudest sound in the room. She sat there, hands folded, looking at her plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. 27 years of being my mother, and she couldn't muster a single word in my defense. Not when Richard called me worthless. Not when Sophie called me pathetic. Not when Kyle accused me of being mentally disturbed for not immediately writing a check. "You know what your problem is?" Richard continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper he used when he wanted to cut deep. "You're jealous. Jealous that Kyle has ambition. Jealous that Sophie has beauty and brains. Jealous that your mother chose a real man instead of whoever your failure of a father was. So you hoard your little paychecks and pretend you're better than us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I saw their faces, eager, expectant, waiting for me to break. This was their favorite family sport, destroying Emily. They'd perfected it over years, each playing their role. Richard the aggressor, Sophie the instigator, Kyle the victim, Mom the enabler. "I've supported this family for 7 years," I said quietly. Richard's laugh was harsh, dismissive. "Supported you've thrown us scraps when it suited you, always making sure we knew where it came from. Real family doesn't keep score. Emily, real family gives freely." "Like you give freely?" I asked. "What exactly have you contributed, Richard, besides spending the money I provide?" The slap came fast, not physical but verbal. "I gave you a home when nobody else wanted you. I took in another man's damaged daughter and tried to make something of you. And this is how you repay me." "Damaged daughter?" The words echoed in the sudden silence. Even Sophie stopped filming. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Mom finally looked up, but not at me, at Richard, with something that might have been fear or might have been approval. "You're right," I said, standing slowly. "I am damaged. Damaged by years of being told I was worthless while funding your lives. Damaged by watching my mother choose money over her daughter every single day. Damaged by believing that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, maybe you'd finally see me as family." Richard stood too, towering over me. "Get out. Get out of my house and don't come back until you're ready to apologize to everyone at this table, especially Kyle." "Apologize?" I almost laughed. "For what? For saying no, for finally having boundaries, for being a selfish bitch who thinks she's too good for her own family." Sophie chimed in, emboldened by Richard's aggression. I looked at each of them, memorizing this moment. Richard, red-faced and righteous in his abuse. Sophie, gleeful in her cruelty. Kyle, sulking like a child denied candy. And Mom, still silent, still choosing everyone but me. "You want me out?" I asked Richard. "Fine, but remember, you asked for this." He laughed, that booming, confident laugh of a man who thought he held all the cards. "What are you going to do? Emily, stop your pathetic little monthly transfers. We survived before you. We'll survive after you." I gathered my coat, my purse, my dignity. At the door, I turned back one last time. They were already returning to their meal, dismissing me as easily as they'd dismissed my humanity for years. "Kyle," I called out. He looked up, hopeful, probably thinking I'd reconsidered. "That 20,000 you wanted. Consider it the price of my freedom." Then I walked out into the cold Ohio night, leaving behind 13 years of trying to buy my way into a family that was for sale, just not to me. Behind me, I heard Richard's voice. "She'll be back. They always come crawling back." But he was wrong. The crawling was over. The revenge was about to begin. My penthouse apartment in downtown Columbus had never felt more like a sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights, a stark contrast to the suburban prison I'd just escaped. I poured myself a glass of wine, a Chateau Margaux I'd been saving for a special occasion, and opened my laptop. The familiar glow of multiple monitors illuminated my home office, each screen showing different aspects of my carefully constructed financial empire. First, the automatic transfers. My fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. The monthly $3,000 to Mom's account, canceled. Kyle's $1,500 for business development, terminated. Sophie's $2,000 for educational expenses, deleted. The satisfaction of each cancellation was better than any therapy. Years of automatic bleeding, stopped with a few clicks. But that was just the beginning. I pulled up the second screen, showing the property records I'd been quietly monitoring. Richard's house, the kingdom where he ruled with such authority, had an interesting paper trail. They'd refinanced twice in the last 5 years, each time pulling out equity for Richard's failed investments. The current mortgage was held by Midwest Financial Corp., and they were 3 payments behind. Mom had called me about it last month, crying about potential foreclosure. I'd paid it, of course, directly to the bank, keeping the account current. What they didn't know was that I'd been buying up their debt through a shell company I'd created called Phoenix Holdings LLC. Every time they missed a payment, my company swooped in, purchasing the debt from banks eager to offload risky mortgages. I now owned 70% of the paper on their house. A few more strategic moves, and I could call the entire loan due. My phone buzzed. Kyle. Very mature. When you're done with your tantrum, we need to talk about the garage. Delete. Another buzz. Sophie. You're going to regret this. Dad's talking to a lawyer about financial abuse of the elderly. I actually laughed. Richard was 52, hardly elderly, and the paper trail of my generosity would bury any legal attempt at extortion. But let them try. My legal team would enjoy the entertainment. I pulled up the third screen, accessing the accounts I'd set up years ago. Every transaction meticulously documented, every transfer recorded. $400,000 over 7 years, not including the mortgage payments, emergency loans, and cash handouts. All of it traceable, all of it proving one thing: I'd been the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. The phone rang. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. Emily, honey, I don't know what happened tonight, but Richard's very upset. You know how he gets. Maybe if you just apologized. Also, the automatic transfer didn't come through. Must be some banking error. Call me back. Banking error. Even now, she couldn't acknowledge what I'd done. The delusion ran so deep that she couldn't fathom I'd actually cut them off. I moved to the next phase. The house wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand, truly understand, what they'd thrown away. I logged into my investment accounts, taking screenshots of the balances. $68 million across various portfolios. Then I drafted an email to my attorney, Marcus Williams, a shark in a 3-piece suit who'd been waiting for me to finally stand up to them. Marcus, please prepare the following documents. First, a formal demand for repayment of all loans to the Monroe Richards family, totaling $400,000. Second, initiate foreclosure proceedings on the property at 4847 Maple Drive through Phoenix Holdings. Third, prepare cease and desist letters for any family members attempting to contact me for financial support. Send. The beauty of wealth wasn't just having it, it was knowing how to weaponize it legally. Every document would be airtight, every move completely legal. They wanted to treat me like an ATM fine, but ATMs can be programmed to deny withdrawals. My phone exploded with notifications. Richard had found out about the canceled transfers. His texts were a masterpiece of rage and disbelief. Who do you think you are? This is illegal. You owe us. Your mother is crying. I'll sue you for everything. I archived them all. Evidence for the restraining order Marcus would file if necessary. The final step was the most satisfying. I'd incorporated another company months ago, waiting for this moment. Rising Phoenix Properties. Tomorrow, I'd make an all-cash offer on their house through this company, at 30% below market value. They'd have no choice but to accept. Foreclosure was the only alternative. Then I'd own it outright, and they'd learn what it meant to live at someone else's mercy. But I wasn't done. I pulled up social media, where Sophie had posted the video of Richard screaming at me. Family drama. Some people just can't handle the truth. Toxic, our family first. Perfect. She'd given me exactly what I needed. I downloaded the video, forwarding it to Marcus with a note: defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Please prepare litigation. By 3:45 a.m., everything was in motion. The transfers were dead. The legal machinery was grinding to life. The house they thought was theirs would soon be mine. And somewhere in suburban Columbus, they were probably just beginning to realize that the daughter they'd dismissed as worthless was actually the only thing of worth they'd ever had. I stood at my window, watching the city sleep below. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to a new reality, one where the bank they couldn't reach wasn't having technical difficulties, one where the lawyers weren't returning Richard's calls because they knew who really had the money, one where their lifestyle was exposed for what it was: a house of cards built on my suffering. They thought they'd broken me at that dinner. Instead, they'd freed me. And now, they were about to learn what I'd learned all those years ago. Working 3 jobs and eating ramen in the dark survival is the best revenge. But success is the twist of the knife. 1 week later, I stood at their doorstep holding a leather portfolio worth more than Richard's car. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a understated but impeccably tailored black suit that whispered money rather than shouted it. The invitation I'd sent was specific: a family dinner to clear the air. But this time, I'd requested the extended family: Aunt Patricia, Uncle Ron, cousins from both sides, everyone who'd heard Richard's version of events, where I was the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her struggling family. Mom answered the door, her face a mixture of relief and wariness. "Emily, oh, thank God. I was so worried when you didn't return my calls. Richard's in the dining room with everyone." The house was fuller than usual. Richard had clearly staged this as his vindication moment, surrounding himself with witnesses to my anticipated apology. Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister who'd always pitied poor Linda for having such a difficult daughter, sat primly beside Uncle Ron. 3 cousins huddled near Sophie, who was already recording on her phone. Kyle lounged in his usual spot, confident this was all about to blow over. "Emily," Richard's voice boomed with false warmth, "so glad you came to your senses. Everyone's here to witness your apology and welcome you back to the family." I set the portfolio on the table with deliberate precision. "Actually, Richard, I came to discuss some paperwork." His smile flickered. "Paperwork. Yes. You see, there have been some misunderstandings about this house and who exactly provides for this family." I opened the portfolio, pulling out the first set of documents. "This is the deed transfer for 4847 Maple Drive." The room went silent. Richard laughed nervously. "What are you talking about? This is my house." I corrected, laying out the foreclosure documents. "Until you failed to make payments for 3 consecutive months last year, and the year before, and 6 months ago." I pulled out the receipts. "Each time, a company called Phoenix Holdings purchased your debt and kept you current. As of last Tuesday, Phoenix Holdings called in the full loan amount." Mom's face went white. But, we never dealt with any Phoenix company." "No," I agreed, pulling out the incorporation papers. "You dealt with me. Phoenix Holdings LLC is my company. I've been buying your debt for 2 years, keeping you afloat while you told everyone Richard was the provider." Aunt Patricia gasped. The cousins started whispering. Sophie's phone shook slightly as she continued recording. "This is ridiculous." Richard stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't just, 'I can,' and I did." I laid out the next set of papers. "These are the bank statements showing every payment I've made. $400,000 in direct support, not counting the mortgage payments totaling another $150,000. I looked around the room. Over $500,000 from the daughter you all thought was a failure." "Emily, sweetie," Mom started, reaching for me. "We're family. Surely we can—" "Family." I pulled out my phone, connecting it to their smart TV. "Let's talk about family." Sophie's video from last week filled the screen. Richard screaming, calling me worthless, damaged, unwanted. The extended family watched in horror as their beloved Richard showed his true face. Aunt Patricia's hand covered her mouth. Uncle Ron looked away. "That's out of context," Richard protested. "Is it?" I pulled out more papers. "These are Kyle's business proposals. 5 failed ventures, each funded by me. Total loss $140,000. Never once acknowledged, never once repaid." I turned to Kyle. "Remember telling everyone at Christmas that you were a self-made entrepreneur?" Kyle's face reddened, sliding lower in his chair. "And Sophie." I produced her college statements. $40,000 a year for 4 years, plus study abroad, spring breaks, that new car for graduation. $200,000 total. Remember posting on Instagram that Daddy's princess doesn't need anyone else. Sophie had stopped recording, her phone hanging limply in her hand. "But the best part," I continued, pulling out the final document, "is this: a purchase agreement for this house. Rising Phoenix Properties, another of my companies, is prepared to buy this house at market value. Cash. Closing immediately." "We're not selling," Richard roared. "You don't have a choice. Either you sell to me at market value, or Phoenix Holdings forecloses next Monday, and you get nothing. Your credit will be destroyed. You'll have nowhere to go." I looked at the extended family. "Unless, of course, one of you wants to take them in, help them the way they claimed they helped me." The silence was deafening. Aunt Patricia studied her hands. Uncle Ron checked his watch. The cousins found the ceiling fascinating. "You can't do this," Mom whispered. "You can't throw us out. I'm your mother." "You were my mother," I corrected. "But you chose to be Richard's wife instead. Every time he insulted me, you said nothing. Every time I paid your bills, you let him take credit. Every time I needed you, you looked away." I pulled out a printed screenshot of my investment portfolio summary. The $68 million clearly visible. "This is what the worthless daughter built while you were all laughing at me." Gasps rippled through the room. Richard's face went from red to white to red again. $68 million, Kyle croaked. "Dollars." I confirmed. The girl who wasn't smart enough for scholarships. The damaged daughter. The one nobody needed. I looked directly at Richard. Turns out, I never needed any of you either. "Emily, please." Mom was crying now. "Where will we go?" "That's not my problem anymore." I closed the portfolio. "You have 48 hours to accept the purchase offer. Marcus Williams, my attorney, will handle the details. After closing, you'll have 30 days to vacate." "You're buying our house to kick us out." Sophie finally found her voice. "That's evil." "No," I said calmly. "Evil is taking $500,000 from someone while treating them like garbage. Evil is building your entire life on someone else's money while denying their worth. Evil is what you've done to me for 13 years. I stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Richard. That lawyer you threatened to call about elder financial abuse, he's already received a cease and desist letter from my legal team, along with documentation of every penny I've given you." He laughed when he saw it. Said it was the clearest case of financial exploitation he'd ever seen, just not the kind you were claiming. At the door, I turned back one last time. The extended family sat frozen, processing what they'd witnessed. Richard stood defeated, his kingdom crumbling. Sophie and Kyle looked lost, their safety net gone. And Mom finally looked at me, really looked at me, seeing perhaps for the first time the daughter she'd failed. "I loved you all," I said quietly. "That was my only mistake." Then I walked out, leaving them with the paperwork. The truth and the consequences of their choices spread across the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. The silence that followed my exit was absolute. I stood in their driveway for a moment, keys in hand, listening to the muffled sounds of chaos erupting inside. Richard's voice, no longer commanding but desperate. Sophie's sobs, Kyle's angry accusations. And threading through it all, my mother's broken wails, the sound of a woman finally understanding the price of her choices. I slid into my Tesla, the leather seats a stark contrast to the beaten Toyota they thought I still drove. As I pulled away, I saw the neighbors peeking through curtains, drawn by the parade of relatives fleeing the house earlier. By tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would know. Richard's carefully constructed image of the successful family man would be in ruins. The drive back to my penthouse was peaceful. No more frantic calls about emergency funds. No more guilt-laden text messages. No more pretending to be less than I was to protect their fragile egos. For the first time in 13 years, I was truly free. My phone sat silent on the passenger seat. I'd blocked all their numbers. Marcus would handle any necessary communication from here. The legal machinery was in motion, and there was no stopping it now. They had 48 hours to accept my offer or face foreclosure. Either way, the house would be mine within the month. As I entered my apartment, the city lights twinkled below like a constellation of possibilities. I poured myself another glass of wine and stood at the window, reflecting on the journey from that frightened 14-year-old girl working nights to survive, to this, a woman with the power to buy and sell the very people who'd tried to break her. 3 weeks later, Marcus called with the news. They'd accepted the sale, having no other choice. Richard had tried to get a loan to counteroffer, but his credit was destroyed. Kyle had attempted to start a GoFundMe claiming I'd stolen their home, but it was taken down after I provided evidence of my financial support. Sophie's influencer career imploded when the full video of Richard's abuse went viral, with my added context about who had really been paying for her lifestyle. Mom had tried calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails that swung between rage and pleading. I deleted them all unheard. That chapter was closed. The closing was handled entirely through attorneys. I never had to see them again. The house was mine, and they had 30 days to leave. I heard through Marcus that they'd ended up in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Columbus. Richard had taken a job as a used car salesman. Kyle was working at a fast food restaurant. Sophie had moved back in with her biological mother in Michigan. And Mom was working as a receptionist, the first job she'd had in 15 years. They were learning what I'd learned long ago, how to survive on their own merit, without a safety net, without someone else's money to cushion their falls. 6 months later, I sold the renovated house to a young family, a couple with 3 kids who reminded me of what family should be. They loved each other fiercely, supported each other genuinely, and the children's laughter filled the rooms that had once echoed with contempt and cruelty. I sold it to them below market value, because some things are worth more than money. The last I heard, Richard and Mom had divorced. The stress of actual poverty, without me as their secret benefactor, had torn apart what was left of their marriage. Kyle had disappeared somewhere out west, still chasing get-rich-quick schemes. Sophie had deleted all her social media and was reportedly working as a barista while taking night classes, perhaps the first honest work she'd ever done. As for Mom, she sent one final letter through Marcus, not asking for money, not making excuses, just 3 words. I'm sorry, Emily. Too little, too late, but at least it was something. I never responded. Today, my portfolio has grown to 90 million. I donate generously to charities that help young people escape abusive families, funding scholarships for those working multiple jobs to survive college. I see myself in their exhausted faces, and I give them what no one gave me, a chance without strings attached. Sometimes I drive past that old house in Columbus. The new family has painted it yellow, planted flowers, added a swing set in the backyard. Children's artwork decorates the windows. It's become what it never was when we lived there, a home. They thought I was nothing. They thought their contempt could break me. Their mockery could define me. Their dismissal could erase me. They thought wrong. I didn't just survive. I thrived. I didn't just leave. I conquered. And in the end, I didn't need revenge. I just needed to stop letting them feed off my success while denying my worth. The girl they called worthless is worth 90 million now. The woman they said nobody needed needs nobody but herself. And the family that rejected me? They're just strangers now, learning the hard lessons I mastered decades ago. My name is Emily Monroe. I'm 35 years old, and this is how I bought my freedom with the very fortune they never knew I had. The door didn't just close that night, it locked, and I threw away the key. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family who didn't value you? How did you find the strength to walk away? Your stories matter too, and I'd love to hear them in the comments below.